These declassified documents give us a real window into the story of separation.
Plans included assassination of Singapore ministers.
They were obstinate in the way of conscious sinners.
You are Lee's godfather, and he never fails to lunch with you when he is in Kuala Lumpur.
If you are a Hollywood producer trying to do a political drama, you couldn't come up with a better script.
This letter was sent from Lord Head, the High Commissioner from Britain to Malaysia, to the Commonwealth Relations Office. This was sent on 8 August 1965. So it was listed as an emergency telegram. It's going to be secret also.
At 7:30 this evening, a member of the Cabinet, please protect, came to see me and said, "What do you think of the latest decision?" "What decision?" I said. "If you do not know, I must not tell you." I got it out of him. Lord Head just had this news which has sent him into something of a spin. Let me paint you a bit of a picture. It is the 8th of August, 1965. It's Sunday evening.
Lord Head, the British High Commissioner to Malaysia, he has been driving frantically around Kuala Lumpur.
Needs to speak with the Tunku, Abdul Rahman, who is the Prime Minister of Malaysia.
Lord Head first went to his residency. He wasn't there.
Lord Head finds the Tunku at a rooftop restaurant having dinner with some other Malaysian ministers.
He needed to talk to Tunku. He needed to find out in detail to corroborate what he has learned and to see whether he could reverse the decision.
This document is momentous because it is really an eyewitness account. There was this real sense of urgency about what was going to happen on the 9th of August.
The federal government will announce Singapore will leave the Federation and be independent.
I thought it extraordinary that we had neither been told nor even consulted about this drastic step. I begged them to postpone it 24 hours.
They would not do so and were obstinate in the way of conscious sinners. The British were deliberately kept in the dark. So there's a sense of embarrassment. At that point in time, Singapore being independent was unthinkable.
Lord Head, he's hoping that in 24 hours he might be able to repair the situation. However, the Tunku wasn't prepared to negotiate at all and refused any postponement.
So on the 8th of August, I would imagine that Mr. Lee would not be able to sleep very well. He himself mentioned that in his memoirs. It was a very important moment in time for him because the next day, Singapore would be on its own. This could be something that he would be doing on his table, sitting on his chair, thinking of what he's going to say tomorrow to Singaporeans. Separation is a major thing. Think about it, right? I mean, Singapore is now on its own. So you have to think about how would Singapore survive.
We are at Dataran Merdeka in the middle of Kuala Lumpur. It's one of the most historical spots in the city. It's the spot where we gather every year to celebrate the independence of Malaysia. It was here that we lowered the Union Jack to declare that we are free from the British.
The time has come for a break in the old relationship between Britain and the Malay states. Henceforth, the two countries will march together as partners within the Commonwealth.
By 1957, the Federation of Malaysia is independent. Singapore is still under Crown colony rule. It's still a colonial possession. But at the same time, Britain is wanting to decolonise.
They really feared that if they gave independence to Singapore on its own, it would drift within Communist China's orbit. The communists would come to power.
We mustn't forget that there's a huge military base there in Singapore, British service personnel. So Singapore still retains this very important defence strategic aspect for Britain. You've also got the problem of Sarawak and Sabah, which on their own are vulnerable potentially to take over by Indonesia. That's a real concern. Potentially independent little states which would fall under the communist influence of a larger country nearby. So the idea, of course, is that you can solve your problem by fusing all these territories together and essentially getting Kuala Lumpur to look after the problem of these smaller territories in a wider federation.
The Malaysia Agreement was signed in 1963. Singapore, Malaya, North Borneo, what we call Sabah today, and Sarawak, all the ex-British colonies to come together to create this new federation called Malaysia.
I think it has gone on pretty well, but at one time I despaired that it might not have gone on quite so well. But as it turned out, I think all the parties concerned have put the national interest before everything else and have come to an agreement.
I, Lee Kuan Yew, Prime Minister of Singapore, do hereby proclaim and declare on behalf of the people of Singapore that as from today, the 16th of September, 1963, Singapore shall forever be a part of the sovereign, democratic and independent state of Malaysia.
So merger was something that Prime Minister Lee wanted very badly, but it eventually fell through. And what we have in these documents, which are held at the National Archives in Kew in London, is the evidence that provides us an insight into why exactly that happened. These documents are the original communications between British officials in London and Kuala Lumpur at this crucial time leading up to separation of Singapore from Malaysia. There is a very dramatic kind of unguarded government language and quick decisions. Lord Head, High Commissioner in Kuala Lumpur, features a lot in these documents. So in this note, the Commonwealth Relations Office refers to the importance of, quote, trying to get better relations between the Tunku and Lee. And this has been something that is very much in Lord Head's mind. And he has very frequently spoken to both about it. And he clearly intends to continue to do so. It's just basically a year after merger has gone through. It reveals how fundamentally important Malaysia was to the British.
While Britain was no longer the colonial master, it remained a very powerful stakeholder with every reason to want to keep Malaysia together. They see themselves as having some kind of security role in the region. This was part of their desire to continue to be seen as some kind of world power.
That's the reason why it was very clear that they were supporting Tunku, because they knew that he was very pro-Western. And in the case of Singapore, they helped Lee Kuan Yew to cement himself as the leader of Singapore by suppressing the left-wing movement in Singapore.
They come to Britain for their education as lawyers. So in those ways, they are shaped by this British influence in terms of education, they're English speaking. So I think at that level, there's an assumption that there will be some degree of cooperation. I think there's a misreading by the British of just how different they are politically.
It's been like 60 years.
What was this room before? Do you remember much of it?
No, I think it's always been the VIP room to entertain all the VIPs.
This place is my favorite those days. And I used to have my little toy cars, just having a lot of fun.
Tunku loved children, and he had always said that he enjoyed listening to the laughter of children when they're playing.
He claimed himself as the happiest Prime Minister at one time. These are the sort of things that made him happy.
Tunku was the first Prime Minister of Malaya and then Malaysia. As a politician, I would say that he was a true statesman who put his country first. He's my maternal grandfather.
Tunku was my father's father.
Tunku Abdul Rahman, he's somebody who came from linkages with the royalty. And so he was very upper crust, very well-spoken, English-speaking. He typified many things that Malaysians wanted to see in a statesman, fulfilling what the nation at the time needed as the first Prime Minister of the country.
Lee Kuan Yew described the endless hours of meetings he had with the Tunku playing golf, like on this golf course.
Lee and Tunku are similar in the sense they both have dreams of pushing towards an independent Malaysia.
They were friends, and I think that common interest extended to work and play. Play golf together as friends, go dinner, lunches. No hidden agendas, no politics about it. It's just one single-minded cause. Yeah. Unity, independence, formation of Malaysia.
Lee Kuan Yew said Tunku is not somebody who you can have a serious discussion with him for 2 hours and then you settle the matter. He will want to think about it, and then there will be another 2 or 3 weeks before he returns to that issue. And then in the meantime, Lee Kuan Yew said you have to play golf with him, play poker with him, have meals with him, and attend weddings with him. So that was the sort of relationship they had. But things began to unravel very quickly soon after merger. There are some very sharp observations in this letter about the Tunku and Lee Kuan Yew by British officials. There is personal antipathy between the Tunku and Lee, the old feudalist and the socialist intellectual. There is, however, a real and fundamental conflict of interest. The Tunku and all his supporters are absolutely determined that Malayans should rule the roost in Malaysia. They have real and intelligible fears that a genuinely multiracial state would leave them in a position of inferiority.
The British understood that if these two leaders had a full fallout, there's a potential to break up the whole country. Then they would end up with a mess on their hands.
The fundamental problem with merger is that the two sides had a very different idea of what Malaysia stood for.
Lee Kuan Yew basically wanted a Malaysian Malaysia. He wanted a progressive, multiracial society in which everyone would be given equal rights. Tunku also believed that, but with a caveat that this would come under Malay leadership.
Tunku Abdul Rahman leads UMNO, United Malay National Organisation. It is a political party that believes in the idea of ketuanan Melayu, which means the hegemony of the Malays in Malaysia, referring to the Malay being natives, the original natives. In politics, this would manifest as saying that the leaders should always constitutionally recognize the rights of the Malay and resources should prioritize the plight of the Malays. Lee Kuan Yew believed in a non-communal, multicultural society, meaning if you want to have a political party, it should not be associated with race or religion. To Tunku Abdul Rahman, you cannot have equality when there is no equality to start with, that the Malays were always the poorest and the least privileged. So he felt that he needs to help the Malays to at least be on equal terms.
My grandfather was not an intellectual, but had great foresight. He actually wanted eventually Malaysia to be for Malaysians, but he just knew that we were not ready yet at the time. So he can see if that happens, the unity will start breaking down.
A lot has happened in the 1 year since merger.
There was an implicit understanding between the Tunku and Lee Kuan Yew that neither of them would actually meddle in the political affairs of each other's constituencies. Unfortunately, UMNO broke that agreement by contesting in Singapore, and it lost the seats that it contested. And following that, the PAP also contested.
PAP had fielded candidates in the Malaysian General Election in 1964, which angered the Malay leaders in KL.
The PAP moved to contest seats. It felt more like direct political challenge. UMNO hardliners launched a coordinated campaign through the Malay media and also through inflammatory, very fiery speeches, portraying the PAP as anti-Malay. This narrative stoked tensions and it set a stage for the riots during the Prophet Muhammad's birthday celebrations.
The PAP government found that the Malay ultras in the UMNO were gaining strength and using threats and very oppressive methods to intimidate the PAP into submission. So amidst all those fears, what were the options open to them? One would be to accept your Malay-dominated Malaysia, and that would be the end of the matter. But of course, that was not an option that PAP would accept, because the reason they entered politics is to fight for a vision of society. So they've decided to fight on. In the founding cabinet of the PAP government, the key leader is Mr. Lee Kuan Yew.
Saudara-saudara, saudari-saudari setanah air, merdeka!
There were three other core leaders, Dr. Toh Chin Chai, Dr. Goh Keng Swee, and Mr. Rajaratnam. When it came to economic issues, Dr. Goh Keng Swee carried the weight. And Dr. Toh Chin Chai, he was the PAP chairman. When it came to political and racial issues and to do with Malaysia, Mr. Rajaratnam had a lot of say.
We are a non-communal party, and which is also true, that UMNO did not subscribe to multiracialism. So many of these other parties, which also are non-communal, were documenting what they always knew, that the UMNO was out for Malay dominance, you know. So the political affinity between us became much clearer.
So one idea that Mr. Rajaratnam, together with Dr. Toh, came up with is to rally other non-communal parties and form a Malaysian Solidarity Convention.
On its own, Singapore was vulnerable, but with allies across Malaya and Borneo who rejected racial politics, it could fight back and even push forward. So the numbers were on its side. Non-Malays make up the majority.
started off at the age of 18. In 1963, I was invited to join broadcasting as a reporter and editor covering political news, covering Lee Kuan Yew and all the various things that he was doing in Singapore. 1965 in May, there was a famous incident where Mr. Lee Kuan Yew gave a speech both in English and in Malay, where he attacked the central government policies and where he defended Singapore's policies with regard to the Malays in Singapore. I was sitting behind a glass panel where the members were sitting. It was the debate on the King's speech, and then when Lee Kuan Yew came to speak, he rebutted that the King's speech did not touch on the needs and the plight of the people. That's when he switched to Malay and gave his rebuttal about the plight of the Malays in Singapore, saying that far from oppressed, they were being looked after.
Jikalau tokoh-tokoh UMNO betul sayang, kasihi rakyat jelata, bukan sayang hendak menahan penduduknya, tetapi rakyat jelata. Mari kita bertanding menunjuk siapa yang ada rancangan atau dasar atau polisi yang boleh meninggikan kehidupan orang-orang Melayu dan bumi putera lain, supaya rakyat kita dari Sarawak dan rakyat kita dari Sabah.
The UMNO members were taken aback.
There was a lot of bad blood already between the two parties. And then you have this speech, which was, in that sense, a death knell.
He can speak Malay so well. It was not scripted. Amazing. I was cheering him.
Mari kita cuba. Cuba tengok siapa yang buat. Kita tidak mundur. Tidak dielak. Kewajipan kita angkat. Sanggup. Mari bertanding.
He was quite aggressive, asserting the rights of all citizens of Malaysia. It was a challenge to the power, challenge to Tunku himself,
And that was the speech that brought the camels back. It was provocative because he knew that he was an isolated voice in Parliament, in the very heart of Malaysia, right, in Kuala Lumpur.
The purpose and the necessity for a solidarity convention is the growing tendency of a deliberate, calculated attempt by UMNO leaders in this country to stir up racial feelings in this land.
This is the first Malaysian Solidarity Convention rally, and it's in Singapore National Theatre. It was packed to the brim. 3,000 people jostling side by side, watching on stage the key figures that were driving the process for a Malaysian Malaysia.
This convention does not represent merely a gathering of 5 political parties, but with dedication and resolution, we will make it grow and grow into a movement of Malaysia for Malaysians throughout the country.
And it was rounded up by a rousing speech by Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew.
Get the truth out, and we will know that we have no reason to be afraid, no reason to be intimidated. All we want is to get towards a Malaysian Malaysia.
The crowd were pinning their hopes on him and the other leaders of the MSC to carry on the fight for a non-communal Malaysia where all races will have an equal status under the sun. It was a start of a new beginning. There was the sense of hope in the air that there could be change.
Mari kita bersama-sama berdiri dan meluluskan resolusi ini dengan cogan kata Merdeka! Merdeka! Merdeka!
This letter was sent by Philip Moore, who was the Deputy High Commissioner in Singapore. I was very concerned by the way events were moving in the relationship between Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. As a result of Lee's speech, the Malays had felt themselves cornered and would inevitably want to hit back when there were placards at UMNO meeting in Kuala Lumpur demanding the arrest of Lee Kuan Yew. I was concerned to know whether Lee thought he knew where he was going. You only arrest somebody and detain him if you have got no other solution. The Malay leaders are the end of their wits.
Some of this behaviour, some of this language is potentially so inflammatory that it's causing concern certainly amongst the British because they thought they knew their man.
So by late June 1965, things had reached a very, very bad state. Much bad blood had flowed between the two sides. Lee had calculated that, in fact, it was much more likely that Kuala Lumpur would plan to assassinate him rather than arrest him. Assassination was a much neater and more decisive weapon and would not leave the embarrassment of Lee Kuan Yew in goal. Said Lee, I am much more fearful that one day a Malay will show me a parang rather than a handshake than I am that the police will arrive at my house at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, it's very dramatic, isn't it? Matters had reached boiling point.
UMNO extremists at the time are giving speeches calling for Lee Kuan Yew's death, or speeches that are inflaming the crowd to call for Lee Kuan Yew's death. They're really going after him.
The decisive factor would be whether the British were prepared to stand by and to condone the use of the gun by Kuala Lumpur against Singapore. Lee did not think that the British would do this. Britain had military bases in Singapore. They were fighting against the Indonesians because Indonesia opposed Malaysia and had launched a confrontasi. Lee Kuan Yew believed that they wouldn't want their base in Singapore to be affected by any political problems and disturbances.
Lee stressed that he had a personal friendship with Labour ministers lasting over a number of years, and the British government would not be prepared to stand by and see him arrested. He fundamentally is calculating that beyond that personal affinity, they can't lose him. If he's arrested, it will set off events in Singapore, potential communal riots, that fundamentally will threaten British security concerns in Southeast Asia.
Lee Kuan Yew believed that he had British backing, that they would protect him. But what do the British think? These are private confidential notes written by British officials, recording events as they happen. So there was a note in which it was stated this way: Lee would have less incentive to exercise restraint in his relations with Kuala Lumpur if he thought that, in the last resort, he could rely on the British government to protect him. He is quite wrong if he believes that Britain is committed to the fight against the Indonesians in Borneo and would not be able to operate effectively in Borneo if the Singapore bases were threatened by internal disturbances. Britain's commitment to defend Singapore was part of their obligation towards Malaysia. But if for any reason Malaysia fell apart and Singapore no longer became part of Malaysia, then this official is saying that then in effect all bets are off. Britain obviously knew it would be quite dangerous if Lee Kuan Yew believed that they would back him all the way.
My father was an extremely able, experienced soldier, diplomat. He had a background in Malayan affairs.
So Lord Head becomes High Commissioner in '63 in Malaysia. The interesting thing is Head's military experience and his previous roles, Secretary of State for War, means he's been at the control room of politics in a certain way. He is sent out to Kuala Lumpur to manage this relationship between Singapore and Kuala Lumpur and to provide some control on the situation.
Lord Head was no lightweight. He brought the full weight of Whitehall, in Westminster with him. As Britain's top diplomat in Malaysia,
one of Lord Head's main jobs as High Commissioner was to report back to Whitehall, keep his ears and nose to the ground, and through informal chats, formal meetings, and reporting on these. In this correspondence that is sometimes confidential, sometimes is a report, but often is a letter or a telegram.
So this is a telegram sent during those fraught days in May from the Commonwealth Office to my father, and it says, "Please pass the following to Lord Head. You should know that Tan Ton Hong, a Lance member for Bukit Bintang, said that you are Lee's godfather, and he never fails to lunch with you when he is in Kuala Lumpur." Well, if that implies that my father was strongly biased in favour of Lee Kuan Yew, I think it's wrong. He tried to maintain his balance as best he could. I would certainly agree that in his heart of hearts, he probably felt more affinity with Lee than the Tunku. But as a public official, there's no doubt in my mind that he tried to maintain a balance.
This telegram is sent on 30th of June 1965. So this is where Lord Head says that talks are unlikely to resolve grievances which each side has with each other. Then Head continues on and says, "Do not think there is any serious likelihood of any action being taken against Lee, in particular detention during Tunku's absence. Although present situation is far from satisfactory, think it is unlikely to come to a head before Tunku's return." So this is June 1965. Certainly tensions between Singapore and Malaysia are evident, and yet Lord Head is trying to reassure the British that the situation is stable. He gives a positive impression that he had a very good grasp on what was going on. One of the reasons why Lord Head didn't think anything would happen until the Tunku returned is because the Tunku is in London. He's attending a Prime Minister's meeting. So he believes that while the Tunku is away, nothing will really happen.
So I have a declassified letter here, dated 12 June 1965, which says that Tunku has now left for Cairo and London. Is it written by Lord Head and addressed to the Commonwealth Relations Office. Tunku has left to attend the Prime Minister's conference.
He was somewhat unhappy and leaving Malaysia at this time in view of domestic political developments. This was the height of the tension after the Parliament speech. He was clearly unhappy and he asked his deputy, Tun Razak, to stay behind instead of going to Foreign Ministers' meeting in Algiers. He was concerned that leaving Malaysia would cause other unsavoury developments.
It was there in London that he made a significant decision. These are from the archives of Tunku's column called Looking Back. He wrote for the Star newspaper. The article here is him talking about the events that led to the separation, the split with Singapore. Just after that session of Parliament, I went to England to attend a Prime Minister's conference in June 1965. But I landed instead in the London clinic with an attack of shingles, a nerve disease of racking, unbearable pain. Every movement caused grinding pain, but my mind was alive and active. So as I lay there, I was thinking of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and what I thought did not drive the pain away, but made it worse. He was thinking of how to solve this problem, and there was only one way out, and that was to get Singapore to separate from Malaysia. On July the 1st, 1965, I wrote to Tun Abdul Razak from the London clinic saying, I have given myself time to think about Lee Kuan Yew. Perhaps it would be a good thing to talk with him now, but ultimately I fear we will have no choice but to cut out Singapore from Malaysia in order to save the rest of the body from gangrene.
On the 15th of July, Singapore's finance minister at that point in time was Mr. Goh Keng Swee. He was in a private meeting with Malaysia's Deputy Prime Minister, Tun Razak. The meeting was to find a way to avoid collision. But Goh Keng Swee dropped a political bombshell during the discussions. He said, why not Singapore leave Malaysia and become an independent state? Razak was stunned.
In the months before July 1965, Dr. Goh came to the conclusion that it's not working. During the years we were in Malaysia, there must be a lot of tensions, negotiations, accusations. The Albatross file is a file started by Dr. Goh, marked secret, and in it he documented his various meetings and negotiations with the Malaysians. He compiled this file himself because he did not want the secretary to know. Why the Albatross? The Albatross must be Malaysia, the burden that's hanging on Singapore's neck.
Lee Kuan Yew and Goh Keng Swee, the finance minister in Singapore, they see Malaysia in economic terms. This is the means of Singapore's survival. Unfortunately, in KL, the merger really is only ever seen in political terms. And so the idea of allowing Singapore to be the business capital of this new Greater Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur's thinking, never really on the cards. And what starts to develop is a massive rivalry between the federal finance minister in KL, Tan Siew Sin, and the finance minister in Singapore, Goh Keng Swee. And ironically, they're also cousins. For Goh Keng Swee, Singapore should be New York in the American system, and Kuala Lumpur will be Washington. For Tan Siew Sin, no. Kuala Lumpur is going to be Washington and New York. And so increasingly, Tan Siew Sin starts to place restrictions upon the setting up of factories, for example, in Singapore, wanting factories, new industrial development to coalesce around the Kuala Lumpur area or in Penang, up in the north of Malaya.
Dr. Goh came to the conclusion he's had enough. And those were his exact words, I've had enough. And he wasn't sentimental about Malaysia. He's a realist, he's pragmatic. And Dr. Goh then communicated this to Lee Kuan Yew, who said, find out more. So the second meeting was 20th July, and in it he said, I said that Lee, Lim, Barker and myself are only ones privy to this. Toh and Raja are too deeply involved in Solidarity Convention. Any premature leak will jeopardize scheme.
Razak, however, was still very skeptical when he was told that Lee Kuan Yew agreed to it. And he asked Goh Keng Swee for proof. Lee gave Goh a letter of authority that Razak wanted, authorizing him to negotiate.
I authorized Goh Keng Swee to discuss with Tun Razak, Datuk Ismail, and such other federal ministers of comparable authority concerned in these matters in the central government. Any proposal for any constitutional rearrangements of Malaysia.
But he never had to show it, because by that time, Razak, he had consulted Tunku and he was prepared to go ahead with separation.
I've interviewed Mr. Lee Kuan Yew on this topic several times, and he made clear that he did not want separation. But what he didn't know was Dr. Goh has come to his own conclusion that there's only one way out in that separation. So Dr. Goh was also keeping things from Mr. Lee and basically took it upon himself to ask for separation, knowing that that's what Tunku wanted. And then once he went back to Mr. Lee and said, there's no way out except separation. And so Mr. Lee and said, okay, let's get the best deal out of this.
So behind the scenes, Lee moved very fast. He ordered the law minister, Eddie Barker, to draft the legal documents. As the momentum towards separation picked up, Mr. Lee left for the Cameron Highlands with his family. But this was no holiday. He wanted to be near the action, close enough for face-to-face decisions. The British were thinking that he's just having his holiday in the Cameron Highlands. They want to keep it as secret from the British as possible, right up to the 11th hour, if possible.
Prior to separation, there were more than one negotiations about a looser federation between Malaysia and Singapore. The British got wind of it and put an end to it. So for Dr. Goh, you can't leak out anything if you want a project to succeed.
Well, this letter is by the British officer, Mills, Deputy High Commissioner in Singapore, sent on the 5th of August. And the subject is the Tunku's return from Britain. The Tunku, looking a little tired and thinner than when I last saw him, seemed to be in good form. The Tunku played it cool. He pretended as though nothing was happening. But behind the calm, the truth was actually very explosive. Because, in a few days' time, Singapore was to be separated. On the 6th of August, Lee Kuan Yew slipped into Kuala Lumpur from the Cameron Highlands quietly. He was there to wrap things up with Goh Keng Swee and also with Eddie Barker.
At about 7 p.m., Goh and I went to Razak's home. Thereafter, their typists started typing the documents on paper. The typists made so many mistakes and were so slow that we decided to ring Singapore House for assistance.
Razak's typists were not used to typing legal documents. Barker then got two of his trusted Singapore officers to type the final documents for the separation agreements.
We ate and we drank till past midnight. The documents were ready soon thereafter, and hence the agreement was dated the 7th day of August 1965. Not one of them read the documents. I was a little tipsy, but decided to read the agreement lest there be mistakes. Razak asked me what I was afraid of, as it was my typist who typed the documents. I stopped reading and signed.
When they brought the signed papers for Lee, Lee complimented Barker, and he said that we had pulled off a bloodless coup. This was a political revolution pulled right under the nose of the British. If you look at these reports, the British official didn't even get a hint that something was brewing beneath the surface.
So I have with me some documents I'd like to show you. And the first one is a communication from Lord Head, dated 8th of August, 1965.
A fateful date.
Somebody from the cabinet in Kuala Lumpur comes to see him at 7:30, and this is the day before separation.
Right.
And he wants that person's name protected and assumes that he knows, that Lord Head knows the latest decision. And he says, "What decision?" I said. And this mysterious figure says, "If you do not know, I must not tell you." I got it out of him. He literally cross-examined.
Right.
The federal government will announce tomorrow, he said, that Singapore will leave the Federation and be independent. And then he describes this remarkable chase trying to find the Tunku and locate him. Your father goes on to say, "I then went to the Tunku's house and found he was out to dinner at a rooftop restaurant. I followed him there and talked to him, Razak, Tan Siew Sin and Ishmael. I begged to postpone it 24 hours. They would not do so and were obstinate in the way of conscious sinners."
Yeah. He did tell me about that. So he went there, uninvited. I don't think they were very happy to see him, obviously. It was something which shocked him. And
he had an illustrious career in the military and then in government, was a cabinet minister, and then became a diplomat. How do you think this event affected him personally?
I think he was rather discouraged by it. I don't think he necessarily saw it as a personal failure in the sense that he hadn't fulfilled his duties. I think he did everything he could. It was the end of his career.
For a long time, the belief was that it was a unilateral decision taken by the Tunku and that leaders of Singapore were all caught by surprise.
Would you mind if we stop for a while?
But now we know that it was a more nuanced and complicated process.
This letter, I found it during the pandemic. You go further down and it says Harry Lee Kuan Yew, and then it's the 10th of August 1965, so you realize it's about the separation.